last Sunday's message and this one are very different because along with the board, we feel that the Lord is trying to prepare us for what's coming, even without even knowing what that is, but just trying to stay in step. And then next Sunday, we'll probably get back to old-fashioned kind of sermons. But so this is sort of part 2 of our message from last week, that we are now on the threshold in our church history. What is our future? I'm very sure it's not going to be just more of the same. God's taking us into something new. Where are we going? He's leading us. And this church is going to grow. Oops, got ahead. And which means we need to get ready and have things in order to the best of our ability. And there is room for everyone to be on board. No one has to hang back or be afraid of what's coming, because if it's of the Lord, it's good. And so I'm going to show you, you wouldn't expect a pastor to say anything like this, but a very long, boring scripture. But as we get into the significance of this, I don't think it's going to be quite so boring. So I'm just going to read it from 1 Chronicles 9:22 through 27. It's sort of, this will sort of be an illustration of how much meaning there is in passages like this, that we read them because we're supposed to read the whole Bible, but you wonder, what in the world, how could this apply to us? And it really wasn't all that long ago that this sort of jumped off the pages of the Bible for me. But altogether, those chosen to be gatekeepers at the thresholds numbered 212. They were registered by genealogy in their villages. The gatekeepers had been assigned to their positions of trust by David and Samuel the seer. They and their descendants were in charge of guarding the gates of the house of the Lord, the house called the tent. The gatekeepers were on the 4 sides and had to come from time to time to share their duties for 7-day periods. But the 4 principal gatekeepers, who were Levites, that's people of ministry, were entrusted with the responsibility of the rooms and the treasuries of the house of God. They would spend the night stationed around the house of God because they had to guard it, and they had charge of the key for opening it each morning. So notice all of the indications in this next slide of gatekeepers in red, and that they were their descendants were in charge of guarding the gates of the house of the Lord. It even goes on to talk about the rooms. To me, this talks about the different departments of ministry. The gatekeepers were responsible for knowing who was coming into their community. And do they know what the agenda is of the people that are coming into their community? Or do they have a hidden agenda? Do they believe the same as your community? Do they hold the same doctrines? Do they hold the same values? When I was young, starting out in the ministry, like a lot of other people, I thought, well, everybody who believes in Jesus has been baptized, that's good enough, we all be one, everybody's a member. And then you get over your naivete when you start dealing with the realities in churches and ministries. Until those come in who oppose some of the things you believe. It would have been a whole lot better to find that out ahead of time. Is the basis of their authority the Bible, or is it not? Are they against the gifts of the Holy Spirit, that they're not for today, when you believe they are for today? Are they against children's church? I could name some things you would think I was making it up. But people who would say, there shouldn't be Sunday school, there shouldn't be children's church, because Christians should adopt, they should be teaching their children at home. Huh, wonderful, that would be ideal. But not everybody does teach their children at home, teach the Bible. We shouldn't be supporting orphanages like Rahema Home, because the Christians should be adopting these orphanages off the street. Ideal, wonderful, but what if they don't? So in the meantime, we're going to let these kids starve to death on the street, or go into crime, or into child slavery. I mean, you see how ridiculous. And I'm referring to actual incidents that I know in my lifetime. They're against supporting missions. We shouldn't be wasting this money, all these places where we have flags. These people have had their chance in history. Oh, really? You studied church history? You know that? We need to finish evangelizing Livonia before we start worrying about anywhere else. When we get Livonia totally evangelized, then we'll start thinking about other parts of the world. Would you please go back and read Acts 1:8, that talks about 4 dimensions of the world, and they're all, in the Greek, supposed to be addressed simultaneously, not one after the other. We're trying to be faithful to that. In our church. They're against your style of church government. And it's okay for everybody to have different opinions, but some of these people will make their criticisms known and undermine you among the rest of the congregation. So these are the gates I'm talking about. And so some people seem to think that to be organized is unspiritual. Even Jesus was organized, whether you ever noticed it or not. In John 6, when he multiplied the bread and fed the 5,000, he had them sit down in companies in certain ways so it could be organizationally distributed. Being organized is not necessarily unspiritual. And I am convinced at this point in my ministry, over 50 years in the ministry now, that many or most of the problems that happen in churches could have been prevented had there been proper gatekeepers. There's a proverb in the Old King James that goes something like, "The curse causeless does not come." That's sort of a mouthful. But in other words, when problems happen, it's not for nothing. There were reasons. And it's sort of in line with the job I had as being quality control supervisor for a factory early on in my life, before ministry. And what I did was I found out what are the problems that normally go wrong with the different things this factory manufactures. And it wasn't always something different. It was usually the same thing, and I traced it down to the worker who soldered those wires on the circuit board, and found out that if I showed them, because engineering changed the plan, it took one product. It was an early motion detector. They were about this big in the old days. They worked on sonic transducers. I know you all know what that means. But they had changed the red and the green wires where they're soldered. And when I showed that, whenever they were going to run that, I had a color picture. I sat it in front of that operator. 1% error from then on, from 80% error, that had to go back to customer service to be corrected. And the error wasn't even from that operator anymore. It was a bad resistor or transistor or something. It could be prevented by identifying it, putting things in order to minimize those kind of problems. So by gatekeepers, I'm not necessarily talking about people, but policies, having our Constitution in order, agreeing on our values. And we can always adjust those things because life is always changing. But to have them in order to protect our community. Now, with the board, we've been working a long time on, our Constitution was in a mess. Not on purpose, it just had changes that had been made. There were things in there that contradicted things that said the opposite earlier in the Constitution. So, if you read your bulletin, you who are voting members, we're going to provide you soon with a copy of the version that we, the board, have agreed on, but you need to approve it. You'll have about a month to look it over, see if there's anything that you don't understand, anything that concerns you. And you don't have to wait till that meeting in November. You can contact me or us and say, could you clarify this? I don't really understand it. And then the final stage is we're going to give it to a lawyer to iron out and word it right. It won't change anything that it means, but it will need to have better wording than we know how to do. So I'm giving you another example of what we mean by being gatekeepers. So all these things, to most of us, most of the time, seem like very boring topics when nothing is challenging or threatening these standards until something or someone does threaten them and can split or destroy a church. I happen to know that this church went through something. I haven't even tried to figure out what it was. It's not going to be edifying to anyone, but I've known enough other ones. And I've known that had certain things been addressed and put in order ahead of time, a lot of those problems never would have had to happen. Take an example, a doctrinal difference. That's why membership courses are important. Now, there are some churches that go an extreme. My goodness, you almost have to have an associate's degree in their church to become a member. I don't believe in anything that complicated. But here's our statement of faith. Is there anything in this you don't agree with? Well, if you don't, God bless you. It would probably be better that you find a church that thinks the way you do. You'll be happy and they'll be happy. If you stay with us, we're not going to change it for one or two people. And this is what we believe. And so you can either stay and not make an issue out of it and not be contentious, or it'd just be better if you found another church where they believe the same as you do. I'm talking about practical applications of being gatekeepers. You probably heard me refer previously to the church that Connie and I took over in Paraguay that was in absolute shambles. It had actually turned into I would call it a cult. There were no gates. And the fact was, by the time we got there, there had been some restoration. The ridiculous things that they were doing in their services had at least ended. But I wasn't going to take the pastorate. And I went into this meeting where I knew they were going to be deciding who was going to take the pastorate. And I knew that was going to come up in this meeting. And I had a 3x5 card in my pocket with 11 reasons why I wasn't going to take it. And some of these characters thought that there was nothing more that I wanted to do in life than to get control of this church and pastor it. And I was only there out of obedience to God. And so I'm in this meeting, and some of the things were, there were people there that thought they had the authority to say how things could be done, and they didn't even attend the meetings. I mean, that's how out of whack it was. But they felt that they had the right. And so I originally had these on a big sheet of paper, but I thought, well, I don't want to be that threatening, so I had it on this little card, and I slipped it out. And the Lord said to me, go get a basin of water and a towel and wash their feet. Thank you. Now, the Lord wasn't saying that the things on my list weren't valid. So I went and got a basin of water and a towel and washed their feet. The meeting ended with a pile of men broken and weeping on each other. And at the end of it, I said to the Lord, well, that was nice while it lasted. Mark my calendar. Not one issue was addressed. So I had to accept this mess with no conditions. So later that week, I'm in my office, and the Lord said to me, where's your list? And I thought, oh, now you want to know where the list is. The Lord's really had to deal with some of my attitudes, but he's bigger than my attitudes. I thought, oh, now you want to know where the list is. So I rifled through the mulch of papers on my desk and found it. I hadn't thrown it away. And he said, prepare a list of messages on how a church should be run. Then I saw the Lord's wisdom. He wasn't saying I was wrong, but these people had been so hurt by the previous leadership, they didn't trust anybody. And had I done it my way, they just would have felt attacked again. And it would have accomplished nothing. And one of those men who was the most concerned about me, the most worried about me becoming the pastor, it was literally a month of Sundays. There was 4 messages. And this guy came to me and he said, this is the first time I've ever heard an explanation on how a church should be run that makes sense. And so the Lord's way always works better, but sometimes you got to bite the bullet. And so we moved on from there, and very gradually things improved. Now, I want to talk to you about 5 forms of church governance and comparing them to each other. The first one is the dictator. Now, I have a happy-looking dictator that goes along with this. This is the one-man band kind of pastor who single-handedly makes all the decisions. Now, your immediate thought is probably, and this is why I chose a happy-looking character here, our first thought is usually that this is a bad person, someone who's going to try to be abusive to those who are under his or her command. That's not necessarily the case. Not all dictatorial kinds of leaders are bad people. They can be wonderful people. It's just the only approach they know. Maybe it's the only one they've ever seen. So they can even be very, very patronizing. But it's the problem very often comes when that person's going to move on and there's going to be a transition of new leadership. And there's no built-in system for the proper way of bringing in that new leader. And even though the Lord showed me a lot during those years back in the 80s, I still had a lot to learn. And I hadn't built in enough gates. I put in 4 elders in that church, all younger than me, and 3 have already died. Which makes me walk softly. But we hadn't come up with things like bylaws and that. And so these elders, even though after I moved on, and they were all still alive, the one who had become the pastor replaced himself with who he thought, and no one challenged it. And this person, it wasn't someone from the church, it was from someone he brought in from outside and did a lot more damage. Not as bad as before. But you see, there was no system on how there had to be an agreement. What was the system on how we choose a new leader? What are we looking for? And so more damage was done that did not really need to have happened. So there was an open gate. Many of these dictator type, who may not even think of themselves that way, they would say, oh, I'm accountable to someone, I'm accountable to a board, but they've set up a board of yes men. And I've been on a lot of boards and committees and have been the head of them. And what I found is that most members of boards and committees want to be cooperative. They don't want to be contentious. They want to cooperate with a leader. I want someone who's going to challenge me. I want somebody, I don't want a bunch of yes people. I think one of the best experiences in my ministerial life has been working with a board in this church. Anything I want to do, they want to do more. When we talked about getting cushions for the seats, I said, well, you know, we're not a very big church yet. Maybe we can just do about 1/3 of them. They said, no, we might not be able to get that fabric. We want to make it welcoming. Let's get cushions for all of them. Wow, I came with all my arguments to try to prove why we should do anything, and they want to do more. That is a good experience. But I don't want yes people. I want someone to say, you know, there might be a better way of doing that. And I want to know the better way. The main reason why the ministry in Paraguay fell apart was there was no structure, there was no accountability or biblical basis of authority. What it had drifted into, the people who started it were wonderful, godly people, but had to leave. And again, you'll probably find this hard to believe, but the couple that came in their worship services weren't even using the Bible anymore, and they were basing it on visions that the pastor's wife had and had been written in little books. And today we'll be looking at chapter 2 of book 3 of Sister So-and-so. I mean, you say, how could people who have been Bible-based drift into that? It's called deception, and it's little by little. Of course, not all of them are that extreme, but there is really no basis in the Bible for the dictator approach. There's the deacon board. I've seen a lot of these in the Deep South. They are the top authority who hire and fire the pastor. There's almost every form of church government is a reaction against a previous form of church government that had weaknesses and abuses. So they're trying to correct that with something else. But there's no place in the Bible, go to the book of Acts, that says deacons hold a governing position over a church. True deacons have a very wonderful service, but they are not the governing body. There's nothing in the Bible that deacons rule the church. And in passing, pastors, in the biblical sense, aren't hired and fired. Being a pastor is a calling, a true pastor anyway. Now, when you come down to IRS and have them fill out taxes, yes, they're hired and fired. But it is a calling. Now, when I was a kid, being raised in a very traditional church, and this is not a gospel preaching church, but I thought I was Christian and the United States was a Christian country. I had to ask myself, do I only believe that Christianity is the right religion because that's the country I was born into? Or I go to a church that's called Christian. What if I were born in India? I would probably think Hinduism is the right religion because that's the country I was born into. Or in China, that Buddhism is the right one, and on and on. Or in Saudi Arabia, Islam is the right religion. I need more of a reason than just because this is where I was raised. Well, a lot of us can think that the kind of church government that is the right one is the right one because that's the kind of church in which we were raised. And there are those who would reply, well, what I'm used to works. Well, they all of these, even the ones that I said, you don't find them in the Bible quite that way. They can all work as long as people's hearts are right. And there's nothing threatening the system. And I wage no campaign against any form of church government, but I want to know what is God's way. Why should I insist on some other way if God has indicated in the Scriptures a better way? Why am I going to dig my heels in and say, it's got to be this way because this is what I'm used to? God will always move in the space that we give him. If I had a little picture frame, I was going to bring one and I forgot. A little picture frame, say, Lord, this is the area I give you, he'll move in that. If I bring a big one that is, let's say, even more biblical, he'll move in that. There's a place in Paris called the Louvre where there's this painting by Monet. It's a round room. It has no frame. That's the kind of room I want to give God. I want to remove all of my limitations. And so I want to move on to another one, which are denominational. And this is a superior authority over local churches. This is called translocal authority. And so, and there are many versions of this kind. There's the Episcopal, I don't mean the denomination, that's the type. It's the type the Episcopal Church, Catholics use. It comes from the Greek word episkopos, which means overseen from above. There's the hierarchical, the connectional, that the Methodists use. There's the Presbyterian type. So denomination isn't one, but they all exercise translocal authority over many churches. It's not found in the New Testament. In the New Testament, there are churches, local churches, sort of like Usins right here, our own authority, based on the Bible. Now, I just want to put in a note that there's There are some things that look like that structure, but they're fellowships, like Elam Fellowship. Elam Fellowship is not a denomination. Every church that joins it is autonomous. They do not control, they do not own the land like most denominations. And if I know of a church over here in Leicester that particular denomination has gone totally away from the Bible. Historically, it was totally on the Bible. And the pastor is a born-again, fine Christian, and they had to buy the land back from the denomination to be able to continue there. And they are now an independent church, totally Bible-based. So fellowships are okay. It's just a community of churches in fellowship with each other. But then there is the democratic kind, and with a congregational government with membership votes, like us. And the members vote on matters in conjunction with the board, but neither is this found in the New Testament. Now, obviously, I have waged no campaign against anything, or I would have taken the pastor to this church. I will fit into whatever the frame God orders me to work in. But I believe that and recommend that we have some other considerations and make some adaptations. But everyone has to be at peace about it. In passing, talking about policies, I am writing for the board a policy document, a book, so that every time we have to make a decision on something, we don't have to look back through the decisions of our minutes for the last 10 years to find out what did we decide on that. And so every department will have the policies we've agreed on or adjusted over the years, and we can go right to that, and without having to reinvent the wheel every time. The different rooms in the temple that the gatekeepers were in charge of. So I want to go to form number 5, the pastor, elder, or board form of church government. This is a group of spiritually mature members who can hear from God along with the pastors for direction of the church. And the benefit of this, almost all the others are top-heavy. They have the controllers at the top. This has the leaders on the bottom. And so as the church grows, and the body of the pastoral body, which is really what the pastor and elders are, grows along with the church and sustains the weight of it, and the weight of it is not all on just 1 or 2 people. And everyone is supported and attended to. I know of a church in Portland, Oregon, 2,000 member church. And really, I learned this from them. This pastor went around the world teaching this. And every elder in that church was in charge of 250 people. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad local church by itself. And when things came up, and there were like natural disasters in that, each elder took care of his people because they couldn't gather, or they did it in home groups. Nothing fell apart. Everyone was attended to. And this is, the pastor is the first among a group of elders. The pastor is an elder. I'm an elder in terms of the Bible. So as I'm winding this down, I just want to make references to clarify what the Bible has to say referencing elders. 1 Timothy 4:14. Do not neglect, Paul talking to Timothy, your gift, which was given to you through a prophetic message when the body of elders laid their hands on you. 5:17, the elders who direct the affairs of the church are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. Titus 1:5, the reason I left you in Crete was that you might straighten out what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town. The church is there. As I direct, this was the verse God gave me when I said, what do you have me doing in Paraguay? I fasted and prayed, and this was the verse. Then I knew why I was there. James 5:14, is any of you sick? He should call the elders of the church to pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord. 1 Peter 5:1, to the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder. Peter, an apostle, referring to himself as an elder. And this is the part that's not always understood. And again, in 1 Timothy 5:17, that same verse but a different emphasis, the elders who direct the affairs of the church are worthy of double honor, especially those who work as preaching and teaching, that's pastoral. All of these are being referred to as elders. So all of the fivefold ministries that are mentioned in Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, these are all eldership. That's the general category. Evangelists are eldership, etc. These were God's gift to the church, not spiritual gifts, for leadership, godly leadership. So an elder is a mature spiritual Christian who can hear from God on behalf of the congregation along with his or her fellow elders. I personally have no problem with women in ministry, in case somebody's wondering why I'm saying his or her. And there are members who are elders by nature, but are not necessarily appointed to a responsibility. Coopers, by the way, are at a wedding in Albany, that's why they're not here. Lauren was a pastor. He founded Teen Challenge in Rochester. He had a Christian radio station years ago. Lauren was an elder when he came here, but he wasn't an appointed elder. You don't make elders by just giving them a title. You give the title to people who are already doing that, already elding. So how the leadership, pastors and elders, nervous system relates to the church body. We're not talking about a group of dictators either. The brain, the decision-making organ, is in constant contact, getting signals from every part of the body. The elder should be in touch with everybody, know who's hurting, know who's happy, who needs to be attended to, taking into account feeling, care, condition of every part when making decisions. The leaders keep the congregation informed of what is going on, welcoming questions, suggestions, opinions, concerns, even criticisms from the members. So the body of elders does not just take over and shut everybody out. In fact, people should be even more included. In 1 Chronicles 9, the gatekeepers were Levites, spiritual leaders. Matthew 17, there are things like this we can argue about all day. Well, I think it's like this, I think that's the right one. A verse that has become more and more meaningful to me throughout my life is, by their fruit you shall recognize them. What you have to do is say, what is the result of a certain thing? What is it producing? What is producing the best? What is the fruit of these different kinds of church government? It means that there are results of whatever you are considering. What are the results? What is our basis of authority as Christians? The Bible, our traditions, the way we've always done it, what our favorite Christian leader says or said? When we see that God has a better way, are we willing to make the adjustment? So, 2 Timothy 3:16, all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. I'm encouraging all of us, especially the voting members, to pray about this. Look at it in the light of Scripture. If there's evidence that we could do things better by making some changes, are we willing to do that? In total conclusion, you know I always have about 3 conclusions, we are now on the threshold in our history. And if we are going to grow, who are we going to be letting in through the gates? Which means we need to have things in order. And there is room for everyone to get on board and to have a part. God has been preparing you for this. Think back to the messages we've been hearing, even from some of our guest speakers. I don't tell them ahead of time what to speak on. But the prophetic words that came through Pastor Phil, that this church is going to grow, people are going to come who are going to ask themselves, how did I even get here from other towns? So we need to be ready. We need to be looking to the Lord. To me, it's exciting. In fact, I starting to feel a little badly. I'll be stepping down. But I'll certainly want to hear what's going on. So the worship team can come back. Again, if nothing else, I think we can see that the topic of gatekeepers is not a boring topic, especially when we look at things that have happened throughout church history where the gates haven't been protected. So let's stand once again and worship Him, and the next Sundays we'll get back to some old-fashioned kind of sermons.